A young woman in a nightgown flees from something strange that is chasing her in a very dark and eerie place, a place where she doesn't know where she is. Something terrible is pursuing her. That entity is getting closer and closer to her. Suddenly, the young woman wakes up. The nightmare was so terrifying that she screamed loudly, causing her mother to come and console her, asking what was wrong. Without saying much, she noticed that her nightgown had cuts on it, and her mother left without delving too deeply into what had happened. Once it was daytime, she explained to her friends Glenn and Nancy what had happened, that it was a frightful nightmare, that she felt it almost vividly, and the kids told her not to worry too much, that it was just a one-time thing and it wouldn't happen again. In the late afternoon, Tina explains the nightmare to Nancy and mentions the terrifying claws. Nancy tells her that she also had a nightmare about a man in a black and red striped shirt with enormous, sharp claws that made a terrifying sound. Glenn tells them it's impossible for both to have the same nightmares. After the conversation, everyone goes to their rooms to sleep. Tina, half asleep, is awakened by strange noises in her room, while Nancy experiences an unusual event in her bedroom, which seems to be stopped by a crucifix she possesses. A sinister voice calls Tina several times, and the girl follows that voice and asks, "Who are you? Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you following me?" The girl follows the dreadful voice outside the house, searching for the voice that haunts her. The stalker presents himself with a macabre laugh, a laugh that knows he is in control of the situation. The monster wears an old hat, a long-sleeved shirt with black and red stripes, and long, sharp claws making a cutting noise against the walls and trash cans, with enormous, long arms giving the girl no chance to escape. Tina runs and cannot escape the monster. It always comes ahead, always stalking, never allowing her to leave it behind, showing her horrors she cannot avoid. Her boyfriend wakes up very scared due to Tina's loud screams. These screams are heart-wrenching, and he doesn't know what to do. He removes the blanket to see what is happening, and Tina starts receiving many cuts, levitates, is hit against the walls, and is murdered before his eyes, her incredulous eyes. Glenn and Nancy forcefully enter the bedroom, observing their friend in a sea of blood, lifeless and motionless. Her terrified boyfriend flees the crime scene. At the police station, Nancy explains this case to the chief of police, who is her father, that they had fights, but they weren't serious fights, not serious enough to kill her, and she is released because the main suspect is Tina's boyfriend. She also explains that Tina had predicted her death through several nightmares. On the way to school, she was approached by Tina's boyfriend. He told her that he had nothing to do with it, that there was someone or something else in the room, but he didn't know who it was. However, he was stopped by Nancy's dad since she was the bait to catch him. Already in class, a drowsy Nancy sees with suspicion that her friend Tina is wrapped in a morgue bag and soaked in blood. She calls her name, and Nancy follows the trail of blood to see if she can find Tina again, who is being dragged through the school hallways. The trail of blood leads to the school basement, a basement filled with tanks and heating ovens, dark and terrifying, where Freddy is waiting for her and blocking her path. He lifts his shirt and cuts himself with his blades, causing wounds from which worms and pus emerge. She runs to avoid being harmed by Freddy, but she can't find the exit. Lost in the horrendous place, she reaches a dead end. Desperate, she screams with all her might, repeating to herself that this isn't real. In her anguish to wake up, she burns herself on the boiling pipes, suddenly waking up with screams of desperation in the middle of the class, where everyone is scared, not knowing what is happening. Overwhelmed and frustrated by what happened, she notices the burn she got in her nightmare. Terrified, Nancy visits her friend, Tina's ex-boyfriend, and asks him what happened to her friend Tina. He tells her in detail everything that happened, describing exactly what is happening to her as well, perfectly describing the nightmares she is suffering. Scared and with an overwhelming panic that freezes her bones, she leaves the cell. Taking a refreshing bath, Nancy is still very tired because she hasn't been able to sleep for the past few days. Suddenly, she is attacked by Freddy Krueger and pulled to the bottom of the bath, which simulates a lake or a very deep pool where the evil entity wants to drown her. She screams desperately for her mother's help, who comes to assist her, but the girl tells her that she just slipped and that's why she called her. At that moment, Glenn arrives and climbs through Nancy's bedroom window. She asks him to please wake her up because she is going to look for someone in her dreams. He, with much disbelief, accepts the deal, telling her to trust him to wake her up.
Nancy walks down a foggy street in a dark place, reaching the police station and seeing her friend sleeping in the cell. But then Freddy Krueger arrives, entering the cell to kill her friend. She, helpless, watches from above the cell, unable to do anything to save her friend. She screams without receiving a response from Glenn to wake her up. Mortified, Nancy runs home at high speed, in a dark world where nothing is as it seems, where nothing works as it should. Freddy follows her mercilessly and she arrives at her bedroom, where Glenn is deeply asleep. She looks at her mirror and screams loudly, "This is not real, this is not real, this is not real." Suddenly, she is attacked by Freddy and they start to fight, in a completely unequal battle where she is the victim. Miraculously, an alarm clock wakes her up. Angry because Glenn didn't wake her up, she scolds and reproaches him. Just then, her mom arrives, and Glenn leaves through the window he came in. Nancy, sensing that something very wrong has happened, heads with Glenn to the police station to ask about Rod, who was Tina's boyfriend, and asks the officers if they could please let her see him to know if he is really okay, not knowing that his father is also at the station. She begs them to please verify that he is okay. But he was already dead, as Freddy killed him with his sheet, strangling him and making it look like he did it himself.
Nancy is taken to a medical center for tests to find out what is happening with her nightmares, her recurring and horrible nightmares, forced to lie on a hospital bed full of monitors, full of probes and devices to detect brainwaves during sleep, to know what is happening. Once she starts dreaming, she immediately begins to scream loudly. Her mother and the doctor, desperate, rush to her aid to wake her up. Once awake, Nancy has 3 cuts from blades on her arm and also brought from the Beyond Freddy's hat.
Nancy, fed up with what is happening, confronts her mother and senses that she knows something about what is happening to her. Unable to hide it any longer, she tells her that Freddy was someone from her youth who had killed more than 20 children.
He was taken to trial, but due to a technicality, he was set free. The parents of the children and neighbors, enraged, burned him alive in his house. Nancy and Glenn make a plan to trap Freddy in their dreams, but they have to stay awake at least until midnight. Glenn, unable to keep even one promise, falls asleep and is attacked by Freddy, who kills him. This makes Nancy worry because she is the next target of the killer. Nancy talks to her dad in Glenn's house, the murdered one, and asks him to please wake her up in 20 minutes because she is going to sleep, as it will make Freddy appear in the real world, but not before setting several traps for Freddy once he manages to cross into the real world, just like he did with his hat.
After almost 7 days without sleep, poor Nancy is ready to fight her last battle against that monster that haunts her every night and sets off on the journey to the lands of Morpheus. Once Nancy enters the killer's domain, she confronts him, shouting for him to fight her. Once Freddy appears, Nancy runs away from him. Being far away and with only 10 seconds left on the timer, Freddy appears, and without thinking, she lunges at him to hold him and bring him to the real world. The girl wakes up with a bit of relief, saying, "I'm alive." Just then, Freddy appears and starts attacking her. She, with the traps ready, defends herself and leaves him locked in her room. She calls for her dad, who is across the street at the neighbor's house. Freddy manages to escape from Nancy's bedroom but is brutally beaten by all the traps she set and falls down the stairs of the house. She keeps escaping from him, not stopping to attack him with everything, even to the point of setting him on fire, and then locks him in the basement. Meanwhile, the police reinforcements arrive at the house. Freddy manages to escape from the basement and takes Nancy's mom to the other world. Nancy is left alone in her mother's room, contemplating the empty bed. Once she turns her back to the bed, Freddy appears behind her. But she tells him it's nothing and decides to ignore him. Freddy lunges at her but can't do anything and fades away. Nancy with her mother on a bright and foggy morning where all her friends are still alive and come to pick her up to go to school in Glenn's convertible. Nancy gets in. Suddenly the windows and the roof close and the car starts moving involuntarily. Nancy calls for help from her mother, but Freddy breaks the small window of the front door and takes Nancy's mother, implying that Nancy has not woken up and is still dreaming.
The movie ends with 3 girls singing 1 2 Freddy's coming for you, 3 4 better lock your door, 5 6 grab a crucifix, 7 8 can you stay up late, 9 10 never sleep again.